On today's show, we talk with Walter Beede, and we talk about college recruiting, travel baseball, academic, and passion.
Welcome to another episode of the Baseball Awakening Podcast, where we dive into the raw, unfiltered, unsexy side of player development. Get ready for some knowledge bombs with your host, Geoff Rottmayer.
Welcome to the Baseball Awakening Podcast. I'm Geoff Rottmayer. Today, we sit down with Walter Beede, who runs a company called Baseball Process on baseballprocess.com. And he uses his experience to educate parents and players on the different processes of working up the baseball ladder. Walter, how are you, sir?
Geoff, I'm fantastic. A little bit on the chilly side here in Greater Boston, but other than that, things are great.
Yeah, I get it, man. So Walter, listen, you have a business called Baseball Process, and what I would like to do is talk about that today. But first, let's talk about your baseball background, and then talk a little bit about how you got into the baseball process business.
Sure. Well, back in the late 70s, and when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and we played American Legion baseball and high school baseball, the old time scouts would come to some of your games, and that's how the college coaches would find out about the kids from the Northeast or the Mid-Atlantic areas. The big schools at the time were the Pac-10 at the time, the Pac-10 schools, Arizona State, UCLA, USC, etc. Well, I played my American Legion schedule, and, I played against guys like Ronnie Darling. He played in West Boylston Legion in St. John's High School in Shrewsbury, Mass. And there were scouts at the games, and, very competitive environment, and fortunate enough to get drafted in 1981, my senior year in high school, by the Chicago Cubs in the 13th round. And I also had a scholarship to go to Arizona State. Jim Brock, Coach Brock at the time, Lenny Murillo, who was a Major League Scouting Bureau scout, was tight with Coach Brock. And, I went out there, visited, was really enamored with, A, the weather, B, the baseball. But I had, I had gone through that as a single. My parents had passed away when I was very young, and I lived on my own, believe it or not embellishing or anything. I just lived on my own. I had my own apartment. And so when the Cubs came in and, they came in and sat down and said, do you want to be a dentist? Do you want to be a lawyer? You want to be a baseball player? Well, we're the school of baseball. And, here's a check, $25,000, at the time, which when the first rounders back then were getting $250,000, like Joe Carter and Vance Lovelace. I figured, this was an opportunity for me to kind of get on my career, get my career going and see where it would take me. Well, that was my first foray into, okay, I've been a recruited student athlete. I was a minor leaguer for about a heartbeat, and I understood then about the business side of baseball. And what had happened is the day that I signed, literally, the Wrigley family sold the team and to the Tribune. And so what happened there was everybody in that organization, basically, when Lee Ilya and Dallas Green came in, they basically just literally everybody from the previous drafts. Back then they had January drafts, and they just kind of cleared house. And I think I may have gotten 50 at bats. Once a week I played in Sarasota. The managers, were good people, but they just had no interest. And what was funny about that is my first minor league experience, I think we had ultimately 6 future major leaguers that played on the team, from Vance Lovelace, who was a pitcher, And I would catch bullpens for guys like that. We had a guy named Rolando Rooms, DJ Johnson. I mean, there are a lot of guys that ended up having some pretty good major league careers, but it was enough for me to learn that once I was on the outside looking back in, I never finished college. That was something that always stuck with me. And I just made my way around coaching ranks of high school baseball, American Legion baseball, Babe Ruth baseball, ultimately became a head coach at an NCAA Division III program, spent a lot of time doing, recruiting. When you're a head coach at the Division III level, you're a psychologist, you're a nutritionist, you're you're negotiating with landlords, you're negotiating with administrators and financial aid, et cetera. So I've been through, kind of that process at an extreme level, learning the ins and outs of college admissions, college financial aid, recruiting, housing, off-campus housing. There's a lot of things that you have to do as a coach. So I ultimately stopped or gave up college coaching after I received a call from my youngest son, Tyler. We were in a conference tournament, and he said, I just hit my first home run over a fence. And at the time, he was 11 years old, and I had an 11 and a 13-year-old, my oldest son, Kyle. And, I just didn't want to miss my sons growing up. I purposely never coached them in baseball during their younger days, but I certainly didn't want to miss their games. I felt that was too big of a sacrifice to make. So I stepped aside and then started to not only watch their games, but parents would ask me questions about how to get noticed by a college coach, what things they were looking for. So that's really where baseball process really began, was my final year of college coaching and my first year away from coaching on any level, to kind of sit back and watch my boys play.
Yeah, the whole recruiting process and the draft and how that whole thing works is, very few people really understand that stuff. And that's why a service like what you do is very valuable, because there is a perception of what it should be like. And it's not like that at all. So when I first pulled up your website, baseballprocess.com, you have something on there that I really like. And it said this: I watch you warm up. I watch who cut corners. I see who stretches half-heartedly. I watch body language. And right there is enough information for me to know how committed a player is. I love that. Can you kind of talk a little bit about that and what that means?
Sure. A lot of parents and a lot of student athletes are led to believe, they get lost in the sea of statistics, and they want to rattle off, various statistics that they feel, kind of put their son in a positive light. And I used to always say to not only my sons, but to people that would ask or people that I would go watch, I'd say, Major League scouts and college coaches, they basically formulate their opinions on players, before a game even starts, whether that's during in and out, infield, outfield, or in a cage, or in a bullpen session. They see who shows up to the ballpark, how they dress, is mom or dad carrying your equipment bag? They notice these little tiny things, and they also notice interaction with teammates before the game, during the game, obviously, and obviously after the game. And so what parents fail to understand is your moment may be so fleeting, where a coach or scout shows up at a ballpark and the body language or the way they're wearing the uniform may just signal not our kind of guy. And you may never get that opportunity again. And so while obviously talent and skill sets are a prerequisite for a student athlete to get recruited and or scouted, there's some other underlying things that go into the recruitment of a college student athlete. And I think that if more parents were aware, and more importantly, if more student athletes were aware how keenly we are watching when they get off the bus. You know, exactly what they do from a pregame routine, their eating habits. You know, I had a young man that I went to go see one time, as silly as this may sound. He showed up, he got off the bus, shirt was untucked, flip-flops, shorts, eating a candy bar, threw the wrapper of the candy bar on the ground, had headphones on, never had a dialogue with his teammates, and just went to go sit in the dugout. And that was a red flare. So coaches and scouts, sometimes they find themselves seeing the negative more than they are allowed to see the positive, meaning, okay, you've given me no foundation and no excitement to want to stick around and see what it looks like, or you know what, this just isn't our kind of guy. This is a me guy versus a we guy. And, you know, from a very, very young age, I always tried to implement and stress to my sons, and obviously those that played with me, for me, listen, this game, it has a beginning and it has an end. And in between that journey, no one wants to be around a me guy. And we use these acronyms, we throw them around in these cliches, but for me, it was always winners execute, we, versus making excuses, me. And so those guys that are me guys, they tend to be the ones I was sore that day. And you can see it in the very beginning. So when I first show up and I start to look at and evaluate players, which is a strength that I trust, I can tell almost immediately, this is a guy I want to watch, or this is a guy I just don't think we can help. So that's one thing I try to get across to parents and student athletes from the very, very beginning when I begin to work with them.
Yeah, I agree. You know, that stuff, they just don't understand that. And that's super important. You know, let's kind of talk about the process, the recruiting process, because it seems like we are so focused on the recruiting firms and the websites, you know, which has its pros and its cons, but it seems like even the college showcases that are kind of becoming a big thing. You know, it's almost like a fundraiser for them. You know, they send out mass emails, so everyone's invited to everything. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what that process is like? You know, how do I know I am being recruited by someone versus them just sending me stuff because they want to see me and show off, you know, what I have in a tryout or something?
Well, this is really where the rubber hits the road for me. And this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. We've become the sport within the United States, for the most part, has become so homogenized that we think there's a straight line between a student athlete, high school coaches, college coaches to pro ball. And really, it couldn't be further from the truth. So the first thing is, the vast majority, anytime a student athlete or a parent registers a student athlete for any camp anywhere in the country, and I use Perfect Game as an example, PBR, you know, all of the other big showcase type events, those emails are essentially sold, or you have access to them. Coaches and clinics and camps have access to that information. And so they can create a mailing list. And that mailing list, they don't care if you're in North Dakota and you're in Auburn, Massachusetts. If you've attended an event and you've paid money to go to play at any event around the country, they assume you have discretionary income and you're going to be looking to do these showcases and camps and clinics. And so that's the biggest red flag I tell parents. If you're getting these showcase notices, you've obviously registered or you've played in an event. So that should be a signal. They're generic formatted emails and letters. And so as a parent, you really need to understand that getting an invite via email or, you know, regular U.S. postal letter that comes in the mail, that is not signifying that we're recruiting your son or we have people that want to recruit your son. In fact, it's just generic. Hope you come and spend some money. And oh, by the way, we will have some college coaches that'll be drinking coffee and eating donuts, and we'll be watching your son. And if there's anybody that stands out, but by and large, the vast majority of any camps or showcases, I always use the 90-10 rule. There's 100 student athletes that are on the field. 90 don't even pass the eye test. 10 pass the eye test. And out of those 10, maybe 2 are going to be, above average to elite student athletes. And so I set out a criteria for parents. So if you're interested in a showcase, a camp, a clinic, etc., you need to meet 3 of the following, pieces of criteria. 1, there needs to be a skill set that is above average or elite. So if there is not a hit tool, a power tool, above average arm, above average speed, above average athleticism, something that's going to stick out to make you rise above the 100 other, 99 other participants at that event, you don't go.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, if the student athlete is not a student, meaning there is not a true game plan academically, you can tell me, and I use Vanderbilt as an example. I also use North Carolina. When you ask parents, well, where would you like your son to go to school? Oh, well, Vanderbilt or North Carolina. Okay, well, any college is going to be looking at ACT, SAT, and some have minimum requirements, and then they're going to look at the real GPA. And so parents instinctively want to say, oh, well, Jimmy is a 3.0 student. Okay, is that a Q score? Is that a core curriculum? What is our real GPA? Because they don't count. They don't count, and they need to know English, math, language, and science. Give me a GPA. And if your GPA isn't above a 2.5, we can't even go to the ballpark because we're not going to be in anybody's, sweet spot as far as, okay, I can get this guy through admission. And the last thing is I look a parent in the eye and I say, I need 5 minutes alone with your son. I need to know if he has the passion for the game. And I'll know within those 5 minutes. And I've had parent after parent laugh at me and say, okay, well, here's Jimmy, and I'll go, and they'll go in another room. And I can't tell you how many times a young man will say to me, I really don't want to do all these showcases. My dad or my mom, my parents really want me to go. Or, you know what, I love playing football or I love playing hockey. But I don't hear that, here's my routine. Here's what I enjoy about the sport. Here's what I love about game day. Here's what I enjoy about when I have my practice habits, the things that I'm working on. Very, very few parents understand everybody can say my son has an enjoyment or a passion or a desire to play at the next level until they get to the next level and they get there and they say, geez, I really don't like these 4 a.m. wake-up calls for strength and conditioning. This isn't for me. I'm going to go out. But if you know that ahead of time, then we can save you thousands and thousands of dollars and miles traveled, et cetera. So if they meet those 3 things, then we can start to say, okay, we don't want to go to these showcases, but what we want to do is we want to find a college program where we know the college coaches that will give us honest feedback, independent feedback, where you go to that camp, it's a one-day event, and that coach says, I see something, or you know what, Walt, he doesn't have this tool, he needs to go here, because that in itself can be used as a foundation if we need to participate in more showcases or camps or clinics. But, the thing is, unless a college is reaching out to a student athlete directly, then you're not being recruited, and sometimes it can come early in the form of a form letter that says, due to this rule, the NCAA, we cannot start our active recruiting, but we can, we'd like you to participate in one of our camps. There's generic letters, and then there's letters where you can say, okay, this was a handwritten letter by a college coach. This wasn't a form letter. So there's a lot of things that really go into, again, is it real or is it Memorex before a student athlete is what I consider to be being actively recruited by a Division I, II, or III program.
Receive a Baseball Awakening decal by subscribing on iTunes and leaving an objective review. To claim your decals, screenshot the review and email it to Geoff at baseballawakening.com. That's Geoff at baseballawakening.com, and we'll get that your way.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for sharing that. And so I want to kind of get into each of those three things. So the skill set, above average and elite. I've got a couple questions on that. How can they, for our listeners, how can they figure out if they are above average to elite? And then two, I think a lot of people don't realize how early they need to start the process of maybe developing those skill sets. So what's your advice on the age range on when they need to start really focusing in on, especially if it's what they really want to do, and there's a lot of work involved. So what's your advice there?
Well, the biggest thing I tell parents is travel ball before the age of 14, for the most part, is a waste of time. At the age of 14, so getting to the age of 14, you have Little League here in New England, and that's 9 to 12-year-old boys. You want them to have fun with their friends. There needs to be some semblance of enjoyment and a passion for the game of baseball. And as their skill sets develop, the cream always begins to rise to the top. And everybody wants to be the shortstop. Everybody wants to be the starting pitcher. But we're starting to take away the enjoyment of the game at a very young level, and we're making everything what I call a caged animal. Everything's in a cage. We take batting practice in a cage. We throw bullpens in a cage. Everything is a cage. And we don't allow the boys to just, the green grass, smell the leather, smell the baseball, see their buddies, get their uniforms dirty, and fail. The boys from 9 to 12 are going to fail. There's a lot of failure. And statistics, I don't think any college coach or any major league scout has ever called a parent and said, can you tell me what Jimmy hit when he was 10 years old in Little League All-Stars or 12 years old? So that's the first thing. You have to see do they have a passion? And the minute that the boys begin to exhibit, okay, there's a desire to play, at 13 is kind of the fork in the road. 13 is when most boys say, okay, I played baseball, but maybe I like this sport better. Maybe I just don't like sports at all. Maybe I'm going to focus on, being a student, an academic. Maybe I want to be in the volunteer. There are various things that happen at 13, and, awfully, as sad as it sounds, a lot of boys just want to play video games and hang with their buddies, which I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but I don't like boys staying inside. But with regard to baseball, 90% of the boys, there's 2 million boys that play Little League baseball in the United States. Out of those 2 million boys, only 400,000 are going to make their way to a high school baseball field. And out of that 400,000, only 35,000 are going to ultimately play at any level of college baseball, and that's junior college, NAIA, or NCAA 1, 2, and 3. So at 14 years old is really where, okay, now I want to make sure my son has exhibited some skill sets. 13 years old, I want to start to get him some coaching, meaning the nuances of the game, knowing situational baseball. At 13 and 14 is when the intellect begins to take over. The field suddenly gets bigger for the last time. There's a lot of different things that go on a 60, 90 field that aren't happening at 45 and 60 or 50 and 70 foot fields. And so we need to learn, what is my role within the game? What am I good at? And where does my game need work? That needs to be addressed at 13 and 14 years old. In other words, if I have a young man and he has an extremely strong arm, and he says, I love to catch. Okay, well, have you ever explored pitching? Do you know anything about catching in pitching? Do you love being a catcher and don't want any part of being a pitcher? Are you open to being a pitcher? So there's a lot of things that I have to take off of a skill set that is flashing at 13 and 14 on the bigger diamond. Just because I had a good fastball in Little League or in Cal Ripken at 50 feet or 45 feet doesn't mean I'm going to have an explosive fastball as a 13 or 14-year-old. The other thing that's kind of a lost art is we have all these players that teach me a curveball, teach me a cutter, teach me how to hit home runs and exit speed and all these things that I can attach to my bat that tells you what my swing speed is and my exit speed and all of those types of things. Well, hold on. You have to learn how to handle the barrel of the bat. The greatest quote I ever saw when I was a kid was with Ted Williams. And he used to say, it's not the arrow, it's the Indian. And so I explained to parents, all these new gadgets and gadgets and latest baseball bats and the axe handle bats and the $400 aluminum bats, they don't work unless the Indian knows how to handle the bow and arrow. And so you say to parents, let's develop these skill sets. Let's make sure he can handle the barrel. Make sure he knows how to put a barrel on a bat consistently. And then we'll work on exit speed. Let's make sure he can locate a fastball. And then we'll work on secondary pitches. Let's make sure he has the necessary foot speed to play the middle of the infield. And oh, by the way, if your son is an outfielder and he doesn't have the foot speed, chances of him being a center fielder at the next levels are slim to none. Let's make him a right fielder, which immediately, well, he's better than a right fielder. Oh, by the way, there's some of the best athletes in the game that are paid tens of millions of dollars, i.e. Bryce Harper, are right fielders. And so, you have to learn to play these positions based on your skill sets. And that happens at 13 and 14. And I always try to get parents to understand the more your son can see the field from each position, later on in the game, the better he'll be, because he'll have opportunities. When a coach says, who can play third base? I can. When a coach says, who can catch? I can. You want to be that guy that gives the coach versatility. And we see it in today's game at the major league level. You listen to general managers and presidents of these major league teams, the first thing they say is, we like players that give us versatility on the diamond, that can not only play the infield, but they can catch in an emergency, they can play the outfield. That makes our roster it's a very valuable piece to make our roster extremely flexible and versatile throughout the course of a season. The same thing can be said at the collegiate level. And parents, I think, are led to believe just because Jimmy is the starting shortstop, at the local high school, that means he's going to be top, in college or beyond possibly. And I always give them, Coach O'Connor at UVA and Coach McMillan, all they do is recruit shortstops. And guess what? They just say to all the shortstops, okay, whoever the best shortstop is going to win. But ultimately, one of you guys is going to play second, third, first, catch, play center field, etc., because you're my best athlete. So I would tell parents at 13 and 14, that's the age that you really need a true evaluation, an independent evaluation, somebody that has no dog in the fight, whether that's a local college coach, a local major league scout, somebody that can say, these are the present skill sets, these are projectable skill sets, and these are the things that I would work on over the next few years to get yourself balanced and athletic and prepared to play at the collegiate level.
Yeah, I agree. So what about travel ball? That's kind of, that's kind of gotten watered out. So how do the parents say, because the culture says this is what you need to do to be able to get exposure. So how does the parent go about saying, okay, now I think this is the time to play competitive ball. We need to see where he fits against his peers. How do they go about finding that? What's the process they need to take to say, okay, maybe this is the team that I need versus this one who has all the big names and they win all the trophies and all that stuff?
Well, this is a sensitive subject with me. my grandfather used to use a term, and he never really understood it till I got to be a dad, but pigs get fat and hogs get slaughtered. And I think that's where we've gotten to with regard to travel ball. We have a multitude of bigger programs that basically allow other programs across the country to use their name. And that sometimes sends a signal to a parent, oh, this must be a great program because it's, I don't want to give an individual name, but it's a member of this organization. Nothing can be further from the truth. The number one thing with regard to travel ball is, A, not all travel ball organizations and their schedules are the right fit for your sons. 2, not all events that are run by the bigger name programs like PBR and Perfect Game are worth the time and money that it takes for your son to go and play. The number one thing that a parent has to do with regard to choosing a travel ball organization is, who are the coaches? It starts with the coaches. Do the coaches, do they have a coaching background? Do they have a coaching acumen? What's their temperament? Meaning, I don't care if you tell my son that he's not the good enough shortstop and he has to play second, but are you going to teach him, A, to become a better shortstop, and B, how to play second base? We don't really take into account in travel ball, at least here in New England, in the Northeast, Mid-Atlantic areas, a lot of travel ball practices are held between January and March, and the weather is not conducive to get outside, so we're inside, and we're running these practices and we're doing these drills, but we only have one coach trying to coach 15 to 25 ball players. And so, when you start to look at travel ball organizations, I had a parent last year, ended up being on a team paying north of $5,000 just to be on the team. That didn't include any travel or food, etc. And there were 23 players on the team. So you don't have to be a mathematician to figure out, okay, I got 23 guys. Let's say 3 or 4 of those guys aren't paying anything because they're elite. Well, 20 guys are paying $5,000. That's $100,000 for 6 weeks of baseball. It's big business. And so is that helping Jimmy get better? And so what I try to explain to parents is we have to really research, and you have to find a program, one that's competitive. Nobody wants to be on a team that is either going to beat teams 10-0 every game or lose 10-0 every game and get mercy. 2, I need to know that the events that my travel ball team is participating in are going to have several college coaches of significance at my son's games. In other words, if you live in Louisiana, and I lived in Louisiana for 5 years while my boys went to college, if you live in Louisiana and you have no desire to play anywhere outside the southeast area, Texas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Florida, and the events you're going to are all in the mid-Atlantic or Midwest or out west in Arizona, it's not doing you any good to play in that travel ball organization. The other thing is you have to know your role. Somebody has to know, okay, my son is a catcher, and he's a really good catcher. Okay, if my son's a good catcher, I want him catching elite or above average pitching. I want him to be challenged. And so does that team allow your son at 14 to possibly be a 16U player as opposed to a 14U, then 15U, and then getting to the 16U level? It's a waste of time for a 13-year-old young man that has ability to play 13U travel baseball. That boy should be playing at worst, at minimum, 14U. And when that boy is 14 and 15, you should be playing 16U. But the business side of travel ball will always push back and say, no, if we make the exception for Jimmy, then we have to let everybody else. You have to go through 13U, 14U, 15U, etc. Well, that's because it's $5,000 times 4 years, in some cases 5 years, and they want to make sure they're getting players and be able to field a team on every single age group. When in reality, if your son is a college-level caliber player, when he shows up onto campus his freshman year, he's playing with men. You're 18, 17, 18, or 19, Well, the guys on your team, well, they're 21, 22, some cases even 23 at the higher level programs. They're men. So at what point, in high school, you're a freshman and you're talented and you think you're ready to play at varsity. Well, those varsity guys, you're 14 or 15. Those varsity guys are 18 or 19. So at the end of the day, travel ball has to be a program that's going to work independently with a player if he exhibits skill sets and is going to constantly challenge as well as coach your son. If it's just the old, you enter our program, you go through our program our way, you don't deviate from our plan, sorry, that doesn't work for me. But if it's a good coaching staff that's going to allow your son to participate and be challenged, that's the type of program. And playing a challenging, competitive schedule. You want to make sure that if it's just an independent travel ball program that's playing locally, what I say a 60 to 90 mile radius, out of all of those teams that your son's going to participate against, how many of those student athletes that he's competing against are going to be playing at the college level? So if you don't know those answers, you need to find somebody that does, and that's where, baseball process, what I do is I know where you're living, I know what your high school, program is, and you are recommended to various teams across the country that I know have great coaching. It does take, and I'm going to make sure that parents always understand when I work with parents, I know as a dad, I paid upwards of $10 to $15 to $20,000 per season for my boys to participate in various programs. But I also know on the back end that both of my boys now have college educations. They have no student debt, no student loans, and they're educated, and that they traded their athletic ability for academic excellence. And that money that I invested in their baseball and their studying, the ACT prep, SAT prep, it paid dividends, but they were always challenged and played up or coached. I didn't coach my boys at all in youth baseball. In fact, I didn't coach my boys until my youngest one was a senior in high school. And I made sure that they were with coaches that had structure, routine, good coaching skills, were able to disseminate their teaching in a positive manner, and that they were challenged, that they didn't allow boys to kind of get complacent. And so that I knew that by the time that they were 18, that they were ready, and this is the key, they were ready to compete their freshman fall at the college level, to be a contributor their freshman year in college. And that is the key. From 14 to 18, we're not preparing to be a great high school student athlete. We're preparing to be ready for a competitive environment during the freshman fall of your or whatever school that you choose, that when you enter into that fall in August or September, you hit the ground running and you're able to jump into the water, so to speak, and compete right away.
Yeah, I love it. So let me ask you this. You got Johnny Boy here who, and I've talked about this quite a bit, we have Johnny Boy here who is, let's say, the freshman, and maybe he's 5'11" and 120 pounds. The skill stats are not there. And the parents are freaking out about how they have to be on this team. And they go and they get on this team, and then they go out there and they do horrible, and this is, it's almost like it's too late. And so how important is it for them making sure that they at least have somewhat of a skill set before going into that type of an environment?
Well, that's critical mass. And I've said, I can tell you a great story, and I'll tell you about a boy that fits to the T, to the letter. Young man, freshman in high school, 5'11", 120 pounds. Went to a very high-level academic Catholic school in Greater New Orleans. And he had no tool other than foot speed, where he was on the track team at the time, that really stood out. I said to the parents, the number one thing here is we can't be chasing 10 rabbits when we're trying to catch one. The first thing we must do is, instead of going into travel ball, we have to get into a routine similar to the college process, meaning let's get into a coaching routine that at the next level that he would be a part of. And let's start to put him through the paces and see if the skill sets begin to show themselves. Meaning, okay, we don't just jump into a cage and do 20 minutes of front toss, 20 minutes of live VP or T-work and get out. No. We're going to start with this type of environment where instead of spending $5,000 to go be on a travel ball team and at the end of it be miserable because he didn't play, he didn't get a chance to develop, let's take that same amount of time over the 3 months or 4 months between June and October, September, and let's say, okay, 3 days a week we're doing this, the other 3 days we're doing that, and we'll take a day off. That's college routine. Colleges are basically working out 6 days a week and taking 1 day off. I said, so let's begin to see what takes place. And let's begin to take some video so that Johnny can see what he's doing, rather than me or you telling him what he's doing. You know, we use these words, well, how does that feel? Or what do you think? Boys at 12 to 14 or 15, they don't understand that terminology that they use at the higher level.
Right.
So they react well, and they're very visual. Obviously, with the video games and the laptops and the iPads and all the other things, they want to see it.
Right.
So we take video. As you know now, in Major League and college, every time they take batting practices, an iPad that's set up on a tripod, and, J.D. Martinez has made this almost universal in every Major League team. Batting practices, bullpens, they're now videoed. And then you go back and watch them after practice, and you get into the video room and you start breaking things down. Well, that you're better served not chasing travel ball until such a time that the skill sets begin to show themselves and they're able to compete at those levels. First of all, as a freshman and a sophomore, really as an 8th grader and a 9th grader, you don't need to worry about if I'm missing anything.
Right.
And I think that's what parents
Right.
fear. They're chasing a carrot that they feel that their sons need to be. If they're not in the arena, they're going to lose, because snooze, you lose. And it can't be anything further from the truth. What you need to understand is during those times, those 2 years, okay, does he understand nutrition? Does he understand strength training? Has he ever gone for an evaluation from a guy like an Eric Cressy or Mike Reinhold or Dave Coggins or Ben Fairchild? All of these people need to evaluate your son's physical capabilities as well as inabilities, because that will help us coach your son to get his skill sets to begin to flourish. So when you're chasing the travel ball and you're chasing all the accolades that these teams say, we have sent, first of all, parents need to understand one very basic issue. Just because that uniform on your body, your son's body, isn't going to make him a recruitable student athlete. There's nothing that those travel ball programs, for the most part, not in their entirety, for the most part, travel baseball teams are jockeys. They ride the horses.
Right.
So if I have guys that are throwing 90 at 15 years old, we're going to win a lot of games. But I didn't do anything to help that young man throw 90. He showed up, and we asked him to play for us because we're the Super Bowl team of travel ball, and we have won all these championships, these mythical world championships. And so here comes the boy, and he played for us. And we love you, and Jimmy, you're the best, and good luck at USC. They didn't do anything for Jimmy. Jimmy just showed up, and those guys rode him like a jockey, and clapped their hands and said, "We love you. Thank you for wearing our jersey for 2 years." So it has to be about development. It has to be about skill sets. And that's the first priority for any student athlete that has a desire to play college baseball. The other thing I tell parents is take a week in May or April, regardless of where you live in the country, and go watch not only a college baseball game, and I don't care what level of college baseball, local junior college baseball, NAIA baseball, NCAA Division 3, 2, or 1. Go watch a game, but more importantly, go watch a practice. And instead of focusing on the game, if your son is as good as the backup catcher at any college, okay, now we have a dog in the fight. But if you look around the practice and the batting practices and you see the fourth string infielder, just hitting rockets all over the field, but he doesn't even sniff the field, are you as good as that guy? Because they have to see what dog they're chasing. Right. And how I illustrate that is I'll say to a parent will say to me, well, Jimmy is really fast. I said, okay. I said, Jimmy's fast. How fast is he when a pit bull is chasing him? And the parent said, what do you mean? I said, when you play in college baseball, there's a pit bull chasing you every day at practice, in a game. You're constantly, somebody wants your position. So Jimmy's fast, but how much faster will he be when there's a pit bull chasing him? And so that gets parents to start to think, okay, if he was being chased by a pit bull or in a competitive environment, how much better would he be? It's one thing for a parent to say, my son's hitting 450 in high school. Okay, but is anybody else on the team? What kind of, what are the caliber of competition? Same thing with travel ball, travel baseball. You can go win 72. You can be 72-2 in travel baseball, and your son could have the greatest statistics known to mankind. But who was chasing him? Was there a pit bull around? Was anybody competitive with him? Who's the backup shortstop behind your son? How good is he? Is he chasing him? Because when he gets on my campus, guess what? I have 3 shortstops that were all American high school players, and I got to find the best one that helps our team win. That's the pit bull that's going to be chasing your son when he gets to college. And same thing in pro ball. That funnel gets really tight the higher up the game you go. And if you don't learn that when they're younger in travel ball and you don't prepare them to be competitive and to be consistent in their routines and in their game prep and then in their games, that's what you need to be looking for. You can see all the trophies behind the coach's head, but what are you doing for me now? What are you going to do for my son? How are you going to prepare my son? Because most of the kids roll out of high school baseball and just roll into travel baseball. And there's not a whole heck of a lot of time, as I'm sure you're well aware, of practice. You just kind of play all these tournaments, all across the country. And, the big boys are starting to die on the vine. Perfect Game was just sold. It's not that it doesn't have the same cachet to go play at a tournament in Georgia anymore that it right. used to be a very competitive environment. Same thing with the PBR. I mean, you're paying money to pay more money to get invited to go play more money. And what is that doing for my son? So, there's a lot of information there that I just spewed out, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's better to get an evaluation and an understanding of your son's present skill sets, projectable skill sets, and maybe take a year, a summer or 2 to get those skill sets developed to the point where now they're prepared to be actively recruited.
I'm Geoff Rottmayer, and thank you for listening to our conversation on the Baseball Awakening podcast. Stay tuned for part 2 of our conversation with Walter Beede tomorrow.